the doubts can be your friend. Go deep with the doubts. The doubts allow you to see a different perspective.
My name is Bethany Saltman, and I am an author and a best-selling book coach.
And I'm Fran Hauser. I'm an author, a keynote speaker, and a publishing strategist. These How I Did It conversations will inspire listeners to claim their own authority mindset and turn the story they can't stop telling into a book the world needs to read.
This is Bookbound, the podcast, created in partnership with Share Your Genius. Welcome to the show, everyone. I can't wait for you to meet our guest on this episode. Maggie Jackson is a 3-time author, and her latest book is called Uncertain: The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure. In this book, she explores why we paradoxically should seek not knowing in times of flux. She's an award-winning author and journalist celebrated for her exploration of social shifts, particularly the impact of technology and humanity. Beyond her insights about the author journey, she dropped some serious nuggets of wisdom on living in the midst of uncertainty. I think we could all use a little help with that. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation with Maggie. So you are in the middle of a book launch, and thank you for inviting us to your event last night. And we were bummed that we couldn't go. How did it go?
Oh, it was fantastic. There were 125 people.
Wow.
And all sorts of wonderful questions and a great discussion. And, it just flew by and there was real buzz. It was wonderful.
Oh,
It was like a dream come true, basically, at the Strand. I mean, it was fantastic.
wow. That is every writer's dream, right? A book launch at the Strand. Incredible.
Yes, they do it rather well. I have to put in a plug for them. My goodness. What a job being the events manager at a bookstore.
Mhm.
Man, okay.
Yeah. Well, we're so excited to talk to you. So I'm going to dive in with our first question. We'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the story at the heart of this book. As a journalist, you are learning all the time. How do you know when something is calling your name as a book?
Yes, that is such a quantum and important and difficult question to answer because the journey is both meandering and directed. It's really, in some ways, hard to remember to look back down that road to where you came from. But in a nutshell, this book had a sort of interesting, surprising, and uncertain beginning, apropos for the topic, because I actually set out writing a different book after I wrote a book called Distracted, which was about the erosion of attention in society today. And I was really interested in the question of, well, attention is a vehicle, a means. So when you have a moment's focus, what do you do with it? And so that brought me to the question of what kinds of thinking are besieged, what are we gaining, what are the costs, and et cetera, in the digital age, in this fractured, speed-driven time. And I began to write a book about thinking, and the first chapter was uncertainty. And so multiple things happened. Basically, I realized that I'd fallen into this sort of the uncertainty chapter wouldn't let me go. It was just, I found myself speaking about it. I was fascinated by it. But then at that very moment, a few years ago, when I was poking my nose into the nature of the human response to the unknown, which is basically our uncertainty. It's not really the unknown or what we don't know. It's really our psychological or inner uncertainty with all its multitudinal, facets to that. At that very moment, it was actually becoming a hot topic in science in multiple fields, from medicine to business. So I was just blown away because the discussion has been so predominantly related to probabilistic thinking and mathematical models, et cetera, or to kind of woo-woo, let's all embrace uncertainty. So somehow there became a fantastic scientific frontier for me to investigate. It was a really exciting pivot.
I love that. It sounds like what you're talking about is what we call the story you can't stop telling. Like you noticed there was this thing you said that the chapter wouldn't let you go. You just kept going on it and thinking about it and talking about it. I love that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I do my work. I don't know whether I adopted this or created it, but I have in my kind of inner phrase called the cocktail party tell. And so if I'm meaning just even bringing something home to dinner, but if I discover something within the research journey, and or as the topic of a book itself or even an article, and I cannot wait to tell someone or find myself telling them that again and again and again, and they have this great wow reaction, well then I know I'm really on to something that matters and something that's surprising. So yes,
I love
exactly, I
that.
found uncertainty was and is a very, very unsettling topic. I've also had that response, but at the same time I noticed a hunger for people to understand it better, since we are so steeped in volatility and unpredictability. They wanted to understand the
Mhm.
difference between our uncertainty and the unknowns that we're drowning in today, and then get a grasp on what our relationship to uncertainty can be and how it can be changed for the better.
That's so interesting. And to go really meta for a minute, the writer's journey is one of uncertainty. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that. When we work with writers, we really try to validate their feeling of this is a mess. Like I'm insecure because it's messy. Shouldn't I be knowing what I'm doing? And so we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your life and your experience, your process as a writer in terms of what you've learned about uncertainty.
Yes, no, that is such a central and important question. And I'm really glad you asked that. That just drives to the core of what we do and what artists do, and anyone who's doing any kind of invention in their lives. And it's a very unsettling, uncomfortable situation to not know. And I think that way back when I was doing the Distracted book, I actually was interested in the place of focus in research or in a decision making. And so I found research related to the phases of resolving a problem, one of which was focus, another was frustration. That was a real eye opening moment to me,
Interesting.
because it's not as if I didn't associate frustration with a better outcome, but at the same time, I always associated with being slow, or I'm taking too long, or I'm lost in this, or I'm taking too long. It's just, that it's so counter to our existence in this instant judgment society where we can just Google snap answers. And so I kind of carried that liberating idea into this book, because basically I realized that the liminal and the gray space and the
Mhm.
detour and the
Yeah.
wrong turn are
Mm.
all intrinsic to what we're doing as writers, not uh, not errors. That's not the wrong path. It's just a different path, and that is at the heart of this book, is that we need to recognize spaces beyond knowing, which we often treat as something
Mhm.
that should be instant. We should move from A to B. It
Right.
seems to be the
Exactly.
idea in our
Yeah.
society. So it was very important to me and liberating to me to investigate the uncertainty intrinsic to deeper thinking.
Mm.
And I benefited so much. It doesn't mean that I don't want to come to a solution, or I want to spend the
Sure.
rest of my
Sure.
life. There are limits. The end goal is not to be in indecision or even in betweenness. But it's I think by expanding the space between question and answer, we gain so much.
Mm.
Oh
Love
my
that.
gosh. I'm taking so many notes. I just want to tell you, Maggie. I'm learning so much from you. I was just saying to Bethany before we got on that I'm working on a book proposal for my third book, and I'm in the mess. It is such a mess. And every time I feel like I have clarity, then something happens where, it's that detour. It's that, like, okay, wait a second, this doesn't really make sense anymore. And I have to think about this in a different way. And last night, I literally just said to myself, you know what? I think I just need to like step away from this for a little bit. Sometimes we need that space too, just to clear our head and then to come back to my why, like, why am I writing this book? Like, let me go back to that because that always grounds me. So everything you're saying is I'm feeling it right now. And I really appreciate it. And I would actually really love to hear about your book proposal process because the two most recent books, Uncertain and Distracted, I believe they were both published with Prometheus. How did you get to Prometheus
Mm-hmm.
initially? And then maybe with uncertain, because your book was initially about thinking, I'd love to understand, like, was the book proposal on thinking and then you shifted gears? So maybe does that
Yes,
make sense? Yeah.
there was a
Okay.
great deal of shifting of gears,
Yeah.
definitely, and it all took, far more time than I ever would have conceived possible.
Mhm.
With Distracted, there was a little bit more of a linear path. Prometheus just got it, and it's a small, medium-sized house that's now been enfolded into a much larger
Mm.
publishing conglomerate called Roman and Littlefield. They've done a fantastic job. So Prometheus was smaller way back then. They were founded by a philosopher. They do a lot of books that other people don't take chances on. It was a great ride with Distracted. And then with this book, yes, it went through this tremendous pivot, this tremendous iteration. So I was writing draft chapters. There was a proposal, but I did a lot of work even into, I mean, I know fiction writers write the whole book and then they shop it
Yes.
around,
Yep.
nonfiction don't. But I went semi down that road of
Wow.
writing a number of chapters
Wow.
because it was a very hard book to frame. Just last night at this reading, a friend of mine who's a reporter said he started the book and said, "How is she going to pull this off?" And then in 33 more pages, he said, "You did. You made it concrete. You brought
Yes.
it down to earth." But that process was a bear. It was very, very difficult because the research was so new, because we all have this muddy, monolithic, negative, response, which is both innate and natural and needed for survival's sake.
Mhm.
Humans don't like not knowing. But at the same time, we also have this capacity to extend and embrace and leverage uncertainty. And so I was trying to understand, well, what is that about? What are the workings? It
Yeah.
was really, really difficult. So I did many, many, many drafts. I don't even remember how many drafts of the introduction because it just kept changing and for the better. It did. It just kept changing. I was feeling my way through this dark tunnel. And then we wound up with Prometheus again. There was some, it wasn't that we went straight back to them, but it worked out well. They again got it and it worked. I had done a 10th anniversary edition of Distracted, which was phenomenal. And I had done that with Prometheus because they brought the book out. So I'd worked with a new young editor there. And so that actually, introduced me to someone who was really a dynamo and again, really understood my work. So I wound up with a house, an imprint that knew me, you know, got it. They were going to do what I needed to do or be with me as I brought out the book that I really wanted to bring. The book wasn't by any means finished, but it
Mm.
was well framed and well the path was outlined at least and there were drafts of many chapters by the time I got to the Prometheus. So it was a
Wow.
long journey. I think in retrospect all worthwhile, and as much as writers can't stand the 12th or 24th draft,
Yeah.
you do find you get to a place that you get to a better place.
Yeah.
Did you so it sounds like, you had a number of chapters written when you met with Prometheus about the book, about Uncertain.
I had a few, yes, I had a
You had a
few.
few.
Yeah, partly because of the book on thinking. I drafted some chapters. They became, because they were intrinsically trying to be about uncertainty. I was really writing about not knowing, not as much,
Mhm.
and the process again, not so much the what's the right answer. How
Mm.
do we get to the right answer and eradicate uncertainty as quickly as
Yeah,
possible? And so I was
yeah.
in that space.
Did you so in addition to those chapters, did you have a standard book proposal? Like, did you have an overview and comp titles and marketing and table of contents, and
I
did
did.
you have you
Yes.
did. You
So I
did.
had worked through the different parts to the book proposal. And I also have to add that because I write about issues that are very, very pertinent and timely to contemporary society, even in a year or two, the technological changes that are threaded through my
Mhm.
book need to be
Wow.
updated. That's another reason this
Wow.
proposal was difficult because I actually had to go back. And then our politics, I write about issues that are really timely. And it didn't, that under the hood aspects of humanity, the sort of issues that I'm really trying to ground us in are timeless questions that, could have been debated in ancient times, but I think that there was some updating that needed to be done, which was a great exercise.
Mhm. And so did you shop the proposal around? Was Prometheus, you said that you didn't go to them first, but
We did shop it around, and
okay.
then we, chose Prometheus.
What did you learn from, the different responses from the different editors?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always learn from whatever feedback I get. There wasn't anything that
There wasn't
changed my
anything.
course.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay, great.
I
Wonderful.
think sometimes maybe I'm biased, but writing about issues, as much as uncertainty is talked about, I think our understanding of uncertainty is narrow and often negative, that some publishers, they certainly didn't understand what Distracted was all about. It was
Mm,
so far in advance, and this was a topic. So not everyone gets it. And I
yeah.
think I'm trying to write, I don't write yesterday's book. I try not even to write today's book. I
Mm.
try to write tomorrow's book. And so really not everybody gets it.
So I wanted to ask you about that. A lot of the writers that I work with are experts in their field. And then they see someone like you, sort of coming along, a journalist, and writing about these topics that you become an expert in. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that experience of becoming an expert as a journalist. How do you understand your voice? Who are you speaking to? Are you kind of deep in your prayer closet writing, or are you really, writing to a specific reader? How does that work for you?
I keep in mind what might be very pertinent and front burner for many, many people. I don't write for a specific audience. I'm not saying this is a book for teachers, this is a book for business people. I try to include both multiple voices of experts and multiple voices of people who are living the subjects that I write about. So I try to dig deepest and try to, center my work in questions that all humans are kind of fascinated by. That's really important to me. I mean, that might sound kind of like a platitude, but that really truly is how I operate.
Mhm.
And so I try not to sometimes even read the hot books in that
Mhm.
field, because
Mhm.
I don't want to be influenced. So I'm trying to go it alone in that particular, keep the most independent mind. And then I'll also add that in terms of finding experts, I mean, I am an interloper. I try to steep myself in what is known, whether it's the latest findings on what the precarity and unpredictability, the chaos of poverty does to children's minds, or whether it's what is happening with AI today. I spend a great deal of time doing my homework before I
Clearly.
ever pick up the phone or
Yeah.
email, so to speak, and talk to people. And I find that when I know the lay of the land, then I know what the outer edge of what is known is. Therefore, I know, what might be a valid and important change that's coming by talking to the people who are at the cutting edge. That's really important to me.
Wow, that's very inspiring. Yeah, so, a lot of the common wisdom, and I give it to people all the time, is to have a muse in mind, because we can get really lost in our thinking and in our ideas and, as a sort of course of act to keep us righted on the path. Of course, I'm interested in if you have anybody like that in your mind, but also I love that what you're saying is so counterintuitive to the popular wisdom of so much of the advice that new writers are given. So that's inspiring. I love that.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's really important to have muses. I mean, I have various kinds of muses. There are people who just unconditionally like what I do. And I try to think of them when I'm in, Fran, those frustrating
Yes.
spots, and just
Thank
people
you.
who believe in me. And I
Mhm.
try to keep them in mind. And
Mm.
then I also try to think of the most critical people who are reasonable and what they would say.
Yes,
Could
I
be
love
a
that.
friend who always challenges me on a point. I have two daughters who are both creative and
Mm.
precise and critical in the best ways. I really draw inspiration from where they see my arguments falling short
Mm,
or my evidence being insufficient. And then I also think about the people that I write about. I I have such accountability and responsibility. I'm often spending
yes.
hours and hours, days interviewing what I call the heroes of my book.
Yeah.
And from the surgeon in Toronto to the woman who is dealing with precarity as a single mom in Hobbs, New Mexico, and trying to keep it all together, and in this
Mm.
uncertain time on very little resources and a challenged existence. I feel such responsibility to get it as right as I can be. And they are my muses.
Mm,
I just want to do the utmost to
Mm.
tell their story
yeah.
in a way that is my story. It's my, interpretation of their story. There's no one right about this, but I want to be as effective as I possible, as just as I can, as fair as I can to telling their story. I
That's
want to
amazing.
read one quote from Aristotle
Oh,
that's, if you don't mind, which is actually pertinent. I think that this quote just is pertinent to many issues that we're talking about, and especially in terms of the need for multiple perspectives, the uncertainty of it all, and the way in which writers offer multiple perspectives to us. And it couldn't be more important today. Aristotle said, "No one individual knows the whole of the truth, and no one individual fails entirely. Everyone says something true about the nature of things," which just gives me the chills.
Mm.
me too.
Me,
Oh my
me
And
three.
gosh.
it's so sort of
Beautiful
applicable today.
And so generous.
and so generous.
Yes, exactly. I love
Oh, that's
holding that
amazing.
in
Oh,
mind.
goodness.
Oh,
Oh,
Maggie,
Maggie.
that's so powerful.
Wow.
Thank you.
So powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's
Well, yeah,
incredible.
I love that quote.
Oh, I love that quote too. I feel like your book came to me at the perfect time. And this conversation came to me at the perfect time. So I just had to take a second to say that. I would love to shift gears a little bit and talk about author platform and marketing and um I'll I'll never forget after my first book was written and the manuscript was officially accepted by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and I was so excited, and I said to my agent like, "Oh, I feel like I can breathe now." And she said, "No, now the hard work begins. Now you have to promote the book." And I always knew that I would need to promote the book, but I don't think I really truly realized like how much was going to go into the promotion piece. And you're in the thick of it right now with Uncertain. So I'd love to hear like what part of this process comes naturally to you? Is there like a part of your platform, your author platform where there's real strength, and it's like your zone of genius? Start there and then I have some other questions too.
Sure. Well, in shorthand, I call it the cave in the spotlight. When you're writing a book, even if you're interviewing people in real life, basically you're in the cave, and
Yes.
then you go into the glare of the spotlight, and it takes very different talents. And you can also think about the extrovert introvert. I have to draw on my introversion to write this book and be extroverted to sell the book and market and to just bring the message to people. And I love both components of it. I am, a big talker and pretty gregarious, and I love talking to anyone. So I think that's a strength. I mean, the world you can somewhat say is sold one book at a time, and being out there, and I love it. I'll talk to the taxi driver, or we had a little party after the Strand at a bar, and the manager of the restaurant came up to me
Oh,
afterwards and said, "Where can I get this book?" And I said,
oh,
"Well, you can buy one right now." And she then pulled out Venmo, and I thought, "Wow, that's really wonderful." And I mean, just because she was interested, not even having been to the talk. I find that that's a delight to me, to crawl out of the cave and
Mm.
to talk to people. Social media is not my forte. It's both deliberate and it's also a weakness. And so I very much deliberately do not sacrifice time away from the thinking and the research
Mm.
to spend time on social media. It is not a daily endeavor while I'm writing the book. I step away. There's a cost to that. There's a sacrifice to that. So I'm not as adept. My platform is not big. I
Mhm.
don't know if that, hurts me, etc. But I find that is my value system and I'm not going to sacrifice it. And I've had a lot of angst about that, but that's just not my value system. I want to bring out a book that's going to be timely in 20 or even longer years. And I can't do that while siphoning my days
Mm.
away, even in short doses. And we all know how the device sucks you in and takes your time. And so there's no one right or wrong answer, but
Yeah.
that's my go at
You
it.
know, I think
Thank
it's
you.
really
Thank you.
refreshing. I think it's
Yeah.
gonna be really refreshing for our listeners to hear you say that because
Refreshing for me.
there's right? I mean, there's a lot of agita. There's a lot of angst about I need to get my social media numbers up. Like no publisher is going to be interested in my book. No agent is going to sign me if I don't have at least 25,000 followers, who are really engaged. And so I think this is just such a great example of Prometheus was really excited to work with you on both
Yeah,
of
and
your books,
I have a phenomenal agent I should have mentioned earlier, Richard
Yeah.
Pine and Eliza Rothstein at
And
Inkwell.
Yep, yep, yep.
And they are very supportive of me, of who I am. They're not trying to turn me into an Instagram, whatever. They meet me where I am and they support what I do and they respect what I do. And I don't have the platform that many of their authors do by any means, but the other way in which I think about this and have come to think about it in a personal way, because Uncertainty was a difficult book to write. And so I was a little bit more in the cave than I may
Mhm.
have wanted to be. It just took longer, etc. I just feel as though, again, it's part of my value system to do something that's true to me as a creative individual. And so again, it has to do with thinking about the audience. It has to do with how much time I want to spend on social media. It has to do with basically touching people, because it wasn't, it was sort of unintentionally, but that people were touched by Distracted. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that it translated into being a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
I'm not a New York Times bestselling author,
Mhm.
but when I get emails from people who are so touched and carry this into their lives, it sounds platitude, but it's not. I sincerely
Mm.
think that makes it all worthwhile.
yeah.
A
Yeah.
teenager in Ireland or a woman in Colorado or someone
Mm.
whose literally mind has been shaped and changed by what you offer them, that's worth more than any dollar or follower number
Mhm.
can give you, at least in my book.
You're very clear on what success looks like for you, which is
Yes.
really important for any aspiring author who's going into this process. It's like
Great point.
why do you want to be a published author?
Yeah.
And you know and for you, Maggie, it sounds like impact is a really big part of it. And it's
Yes.
it's one book at a time, it's one reader at a time, and it's getting those emails when people reach out to you and say like your book touched me. I mean,
Yeah,
it's an
or,
incredible
it's
feeling.
being a part of college curriculums. It's
Yes.
knowing that
Yep.
the book is
Yes.
still so valid that people don't even know it's 10 years old. All of that, it's really important. And I think that there are many, many different ways. And I think that I truly believe, in having done a tremendous amount of research on technology, that technology in some ways offers us the message that we're in eighth grade, that we need to compare one another, that
Mhm.
we are our, it may be in high school, it's SAT test, results. Now it's followers. And
Mhm.
it's just such a corrosive message
Mhm.
because, of course, we know that creativity is not, it comes in neat pat forms, nor is that the angst and the nonlinearity and the amorphousness of creativity is actually part and parcel of what it is. So I think that, if you look at any great writer, author, painter, composer from time immemorial, it's messy. They can't be, labeled in the way that we expect ourselves to be today.
Yeah, no, it's so powerful. It's really, something we talked about earlier, this dynamic experience of being true to yourself and being of service. And both of
Yeah,
those,
I love
what you're
that. Yeah.
saying is both of those things are functioning for you. And both of those things are of value to you and me too, which is, I think, why I'm such a big fan of your work. And by the way, I hope when you're thinking of muses, you can think of me. I'm a huge supporter and big fan.
Oh,
I
I will. I
really,
do.
yeah,
Yes, I
yeah,
do. That's why we got in contact,
I know.
after a few years. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that I don't look at the numbers
Of
and,
course, you're
wish I
human.
was
Yeah.
this or, would love to have the, whatever dollar million, whatever, all those things. I mean,
Yeah.
you've been I particularly with this book, and I don't know if it's the influence or just getting a little older with this book, have tried to enjoy the moment of the launch without worrying. Just really enjoy each present
Mm.
time with people who
Mhm.
come, to a small bookstore gathering or whatnot, or moments like this when we're having such a great conversation
Yeah.
about what matters. It's
Yeah.
really important to not think too much about how the certain kinds of impact.
Right. So if you had to give, a young, not young necessarily, but a new writer some sage advice, what would you say?
About any of this.
Yeah, just about, they've got a book idea, they want to get it published, they're really determined, and they feel stuck, or they feel like it's too messy, or they feel, like it's never going to happen for them. They don't have the numbers, all the doubts. What would you say?
Yes. Well, I would say the doubts can be your friend. Go deep with the doubts. The doubts allow you to see a different perspective. There's something there when you have a doubt. And nevertheless, there's a balancing act, obviously, with doubt and skepticism. I think it's really important to hang on to what your heart, your soul, your gut, your rational cognition all tell you is important or new or valid, and that it and I also say that it's really important, I think, in all of these endeavors to know that what is true now might not be true in a week or a year. So
Mm.
you might be wrestling with something and you might finally find the piece of the puzzle a little bit down the road, and then other people might understand what you're
Mm.
doing a
Yes,
little bit. It only takes one
absolutely.
publisher. I've
Yeah.
really found a lot of
Mm.
comfort to that. And the other thing is, I had this amazing teacher in college. I took a very intense writing class with John Hersey. A lot of young generations don't remember him, but he wrote A Bell for Adano and Hiroshima. He was one of the great early, mid 20th century journalists, and an incredible man. And he told me when he was in his 70s, it was long after college, I wrote a short story or something, and he said, I still get many rejections. Don't be disheartened. And it was so great to,
Mm. Love
rejections are
that.
just part of it.
Yeah.
It's not that you grow out of rejection.
Yeah. Rats. Too bad.
I know.
I wish. I
The
wish.
other life, the next life.
Yeah. Yeah.
All acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so wonderful. Such a great conversation.
We can't thank you enough. Seriously, like you dropped so many gems during this conversation. I'm so grateful for you and the time that you spent with us. And before you go, Maggie, tell everyone what's the best way to stay connected with you or to follow you and your work.
Yes, well, I am on X, Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but I think that most of my articles and where to follow me is on my website. So I have a sporadic
Great.
email newsletter that people can subscribe to. But
Mm.
Maggie-Jackson.com, or just Google Uncertain and Maggie Jackson, you'll find me. And this has been a tremendous conversation. I just
Oh,
love talking about these issues, and you all frame it and probe into it so well. So thank you
thank
for this
you.
real honor.
Oh, thank you, Maggie.
Thank you for joining us on Bookbound.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
Please visit us at bookboundpodcast.com for more on us and how we work with authors.